Day, Lagos. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili.
And I'm Oboh.
You've just heard the 5 p.m. news update. You know it's time for the big hard fact. From now until 6, we're diving deep into one big issue today. And because today is International Human Rights Day, we're looking at the state of human rights in Nigeria today. Here's today's big hard fact. The theme for this year's International Human Rights Day is Stand Up for Human Rights. So we're going to look at what our rights are, how we are meant to stand up for them, and the state of human rights in Nigeria today. Aghogho.
Yes, and so we will have a big conversation which began from this morning, and it's something that we will do, as a crow flies, and touch on all those important parts Sandra has mentioned. What are the human rights, and very importantly too, the assessment, not just from the government has its own point of view, the people have their own point of view, civil society has.
But there should
its
be
own
only
point of
one
view.
point of view as far as human rights
Yeah,
concerned, though.
of course, my lecturer will say it depends on what local government you come from.
As the show goes ahead, we're going to ask you questions. We'd like you to join in. Do you believe that as a Nigerian, your human rights are protected? That's the first question we're asking you. In what ways do you believe your human rights are being violated? What can we all do to protect each other's human rights? Do you think Nigerians fully understand what their rights are and are fully prepared to stand up for them? Why do you think this is? Why do you not think this is? These are the questions we have. We have a special guest on the show as well.
Yeah, we have Amnesty International Director for Nigeria, Osayo, who's joining us from Abuja. I know you've had a hectic day, Mr. Jigo.
Good evening.
Good
Yes,
evening.
I have. Well, happy International Human Rights Day.
Yes, same to you. Don't forget, we're streaming this conversation via Facebook and YouTube, so please get online and watch and share your thoughts with us as we go along. The questions I've already asked, you can answer via Facebook, Nigeria Info 99.3. Do you believe that as a Nigerian, your human rights are protected? In what ways do you believe your human rights have been violated? What can we all do to protect each other's human rights? And do you think Nigerians fully understand what their rights are and are fully prepared to stand up for them? Facebook is Nigeria Info 99.3. Ojigo, when we talk about human rights, we say they are universal. We say they are fundamental. How did we decide what these universal rights are?
Thank you very much. So, the universality of human rights derives from what are those things that are innate and inherent in all human beings. And this conversation started many years ago in terms of people philosophizing and trying to put in concrete terms what is these things that we all must unquestionably agree to. So while the concept that we know is based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is founded on morality as well as what is just. So the universality is every human being has dignity, and every human being has certain human rights as contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it doesn't matter whether you're in China, you're in Russia, in Nigeria, or elsewhere. It would be the same. And this was one document that after the Cold War, all the powers that be on different sides agreed to.
Okay. Now, we recently heard the Attorney General of the Federation say that when it comes to matters like obeying court orders, national security and national interest must take priority over individual rights. What does Amnesty International think about this?
We disagree with that notion because then it tries to limit rights in certain aspects of society, and there's a big risk in actually then applying the law based on who is interpreting and who is involved at that point in time. We believe that law is there to protect, and law is also supposed to maintain law and order. And so the law cannot now take over human rights, something that is innate in us. And even in cases where human rights understands that there might be situations and circumstances when rights could be restricted in certain instances. Those the fundamental aspects of those rights are not completely abrogated, and it is temporal for a specific period and a specific time, and it follows a strict rule in terms of when you can deviate, and even then, it is only for specific rights and not all rights. So what do I mean? So if, for example, there's a fight going on and you say, okay, we're going to restrict your movement, your right to movement, between this time and this time, using a curfew, you cannot now insist that that curfew is going to be there for months on end, because the point of it is to give the state enough time to stabilize the situation, to ensure that enjoyment of rights goes on uninterrupted. So a blanket statement that it will depend on what the government authorities deem is a security breach is moving very closely into infringing on people's fundamental freedom.
Yeah, but how did we decide? How do we decide as a society where one person's rights end and another person's rights begin?
Oftentimes, we use that to explain where your freedom is not in excess. But it's also about understanding what rights we have, and I think that's the challenge we have right now, because we all have rights to movement, but your rights to movement cannot lead to a violation of someone's right to privacy. And if we look at the Constitution, for example, and the provisions relating to the various rights, it states specifically what the elements contained in those rights. And that is the test we now use to determine whether a right has been violated or not. So take the instance, for example, of the right to a fair trial. It states we need to make sure that there are certain standards. The person must be told in a language they understand what the offense is. And we know in Nigeria today, many people are picked up. They'll ask police, why are you arresting me? They say, don't worry, when you get to the police station, you will know. That is wrong. Because even the Constitution has broken it down. This is the minimum the person should have. So nobody is saying don't arrest the person, but you need to let the person know this is why I'm arresting you, so that they are aware. These are the rights you have. You have a right to a lawyer. You have a right to be informed in the language of your understanding. You have a right to be brought before a court within a certain time. And once they start extending those times without appropriate orders, then there's a violation as a court. So it's already spelled out. It's just that we tend to ignore these things depending on who is affected and who is also implementing it. And that is why it's important that we should not get to a situation where rights are enjoyed based on qualifications and interpretations outside of the law.
So incidentally, I know you are a human rights lawyer, and this International Human Rights Day also coincides with 20 years of uninterrupted democratic journey for Nigeria. We've done 5 different elections, and then leaders have emerged, the presidency, the legislature, the state level also too. And we asked the question. Sandra and I joking about how people will assess the rights, and it depends on where you stand. You say whether the rights of Nigerians are better protected now than before. Are you, when you consider what is supposed to be our shared universal values, things you've mentioned, for example, like justice, equality, freedom from violence, and all of these rights, all of these values which are enshrined in our fundamental human rights, which is universal also too, that together with the government and civil society, people don't seem to be on one common page in saying whether or not rights have been violated or not. Are you disappointed, or you think it's normal with what they say is a fledgling democracy?
I think it's about being honest with ourselves in terms of the realities and the lived experiences of people, and also the power to control information. Because those who feel the pinch know that they are not enjoying their lives right now the way they think it should be. And then those politicians are capitalizing on it, unfortunately, to either sell one agenda or the other. if we were to look critically at how Nigeria has fared in the last 20 years, there's enough material for us to evaluate. And you'll see that things fluctuate. There are good seasons, there are bad seasons, there are terrible seasons, and they've also been groundbreaking seasons. In the last few years, for example, we've had some groundbreaking laws that nobody thought was going to be passed. It took like forever. So the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, for example, the Anti-Torture Act, the Disability Act. Those were things that nobody thought in 1999 could be passed. But then when you look at the values and the fact that NGOs, the United Nations, the African Union, human rights bodies have been talking about torture, have been talking about unlawful killings, unlawful arrests, extrajudicial executions. It's still happening in Nigeria today. And we're still dealing with excesses by the security forces. And we're facing a situation where in the last few years, we've seen, and this is debatable, whether it's an increase in violations or an increase in reporting of sexual and gender-based violence, even affecting young women and kids. So it means that in certain aspects there's been some improvement, but it also seems that we've taken several steps back. If you look at women's human rights, for example, and just look at the issue of women's rights to participate in their government and political participation and political leadership, which is protected by Article 9 of the Maputo Protocol. Since 1999, it has been reducing. We have the lowest number of women in elected political office in Nigeria's history, despite the fact that, based on the figures INEC shared, more women are participating as voters and are also participating as candidates. It just doesn't add up. How can you have more women participating, yet it's not translating to more women in parliament or more women as executive officers, as governors and deputies in 2019? And there are so many other factors, which means that even though we are talking about it, certain obstacles are preventing women from fully exercising their rights, including violence against women. And you can imagine, just with the just concluded Kogi State elections, we had one of the women leaders burnt to death in our home. These are terrifying acts, which actually begs the question, is it that we don't know who the perpetrators are? What can we do to ensure that whenever an act of violence is committed, regardless of where this person comes from and whose interest is being served, that the law applies equally, so that we all feel safe and we all feel welcome and we are sure we'll be treated with the same dignity and respect that we all deserve.
All right, let me go to Facebook, where Amadi Anthony says, my human right is being violated in Nigeria because if you carry out peaceful protest against the government, the person will be arrested and tagged treason or felony. Okay, which brings me to my next question. Omoyele Shore, that's going on right now. He's in detention. The SSS has taken him in again. He has an order from a court granting him bail. Is this a violation of his human right, and what can be done about it?
So from the beginning, the right to protest is linked to our right to freedom of association and our right to freedom of expression and our right to freedom of assembly. So 3 rights. It's all put in one, because you want to express what you feel, you want to do it with groups of people that believe in you, and you want to do it so that publicly, so that people know what you are demanding and what you're expressing. And so the arrest of Shore and also Jalingo and Bakari were done in circumstances that violated their human rights.
But if you go back to what the Attorney General said, that when it comes to matters like obeying court orders, national security and national interest must take priority over individual rights, is SSS in the wrong?
Well, that is wrong, because in the first instance, there's separation of powers. The judiciary and the legislature and the executive, they separate the principle of separation of powers. And with the judiciary, when a court order is given, it beholds the authorities to respect it. And so when that is suspended in the name of security, it's a breach of the rule of law. And I think that's something we all should be in agreement with. And if there are circumstances in which the law says, okay, there's restriction because we suspect and harm is going to be, there's a process, there's a legal process. And disobeying court orders is not one of them. And so this indignation is what everybody should be demanding for. It doesn't matter whether it's Showore today, it could be anybody tomorrow. There's a reason why orders are there and why they should be respected. And if you're not happy with it, you can appeal. But most importantly, you can produce more evidence if you have to show that this is the reason why you want to arrest someone. And even then, it still has to be within the law. What we are seeing, which it would be important for us to draw a comparison on, is that the government is picking and choosing which orders to respect and which ones not to respect. We cannot have that. It creates anarchy. And it also means that depending on who you are in society, the treatment you get will be different, which is discriminatory. And we know that it's poor people that will suffer this the most. And we should all speak up against that.
Good. So I know that many times the group you represent, Amnesty International, together with a number of bodies, oftentimes have been at crossroads with the government in how it does view rights abuses and violation. And, have over and over again, there's been the back and forth over reports put together by Amnesty International, whether it's the global body or the Nigerian body. But what's your perception in the role of what Amnesty International is doing? And people point to, for example, to bodies like the National Human Rights Commission, which is in Abuja, close to where you are there, in saying that it's done enough in protecting the rights of people. But yet again, Amnesty International, for example, will roll out a list of Nigerians who are in detention, saying that this is an example showing that the government hasn't been true to its word in the protection of the rights of citizens.
So the role of Amnesty International is distinct from the National Human Rights Commission. We are a non-governmental organization, and the National Human Rights Commission is an independent body who is supposed to, it's government, but it's also independent of government in terms of its practice and what it should be doing. And the idea for us as an NGO is to act as a watchdog. We raise alarm and we raise issues whenever there's a challenge to someone's right or an injustice has happened. And sometimes people think that because we make recommendations, we can enforce them. We can't. It's for government to implement and enforce. And that is why we run campaigns and we do advocacy to ensure that we put the issue in the front burner. We raise awareness
is the human
and alert people that this is happening.
Exactly. Is the Human Rights Commission ever part of the party when you have these reports?
Yes, we also engage the Human Rights Commission because we see them as a bridge between the public, NGOs, and government.
Do you think the Human Rights Commission's voice has been loud enough or it's been too subtle?
It's mixed, depending on the issues that are being raised. But they've been quite strong on the issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Recently, a panel was set up to investigate raids being conducted by security forces, particularly the police in Abuja and other cities across Nigeria. They've also been quite vocal in terms of the SARS, the reform process, and they submitted the report of a presidential panel on SARS reform to the presidency, where we are still waiting for the president to release the report publicly. So on those issues, you've heard them come out quite strong in terms of what the government should be doing. They've also participated in many of the review processes the government has gone through as well. But we recognize that as a body, with branches in the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria, a lot more can be done, particularly in areas in the northeast, for example, where there's been gross violations committed by Boko Haram, as well as allegations of violations committed by security forces, where we've not seen the National Human Rights Commission so strong. I know that in terms of capacity for staffing and also access, that's also another issue, but we would have loved to see a bit more visibility on those issues. But we do know that they're engaged. They're very eager to engage with civil society, and they've been engaging. And they invite us to their events, and they also come to our events. And the idea is it's about how can we collaborate better. Because we understand our mandates are different, but it's only through cooperation that we can actually get the country that we want to see.
If you just joined us, welcome. You're listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info, and we are talking International Human Rights Day with a representative from Amnesty International, Miss Osai Ojigo. Now, Amnesty International tweeted something on your Twitter handle at Amnesty Nigeria. You have a tweet. It was posted at 1 a.m. today. And it says, major human rights violations, murder of over 350 IMN supporters in Zaria, December 2015, hundreds killed in Zamfara state, 19 journalists, bloggers arrested since January, oil pollution in Niger Delta. Now we're going to get to all of these cases one by one, but I want to ask you, what is the general state of human rights in Nigeria today?
Wow. So the general state of human rights in Nigeria today is a lack of enforcement of the commitment the government has made in international instruments. We put a lot of lip service to what the instruments are, but people's lived experiences are different. We have a few success stories, but the kind of mass appeal that we want to see is still lacking. People who have experienced forced evictions have still not been resettled. There are many people every day who are being picked up for so-called menial, non-violent crimes like hawking, which really is a crime of poverty. Because if you're hawking water or bread, it means you're very poor and you're looking for a means to make a legitimate living. And you're being sentenced to jail for 6 months, 1 year, pay fines of 10,000 naira, which you don't have. And we are still yet to enjoy economic, social, and cultural rights as a given. A country that has made so much money in oil wealth, has one of the vibrant economies in Africa, is still struggling to cover basic health facilities for people in rural and urban areas. Youth unemployment is going to be one of the biggest issues to tackle in the next 20 years because we have a booming youth population, yet we don't have the jobs to match the population that we have. So there's so much we expect Nigeria to be. There's a level we expect Nigeria to be now that we are still not there, and that is what is disappointing for us. Many people across the world marvel at our size, our natural resources, and the fact that even though we have the richest people, we also have the poorest people in terms of numbers living in what they call multifaceted poverty. So you might not necessarily you might be able to eat, have a menial job that takes you, but you can't look. But if you fall sick, all that or whatever you have can disappear because you don't have access to good health facilities. If you lose your job, your children can't go to public schools because they are not providing quality education. You can't afford it. It's a worrying trend for us because we know Nigeria can do so much better than what we are experiencing right now.
Now, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to start looking at all of those different things. We'll start with your organization's objective to usher in a world where everybody enjoys all the rights enshrined in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? So we'll talk about your experience, which of these rights is least protected in Nigeria. After the break, that's what's coming up. And then we'll take your calls. You who's listening at home or in your car or in your office or wherever you are. If you are listening, we'd like you to give us a call and let us know. Do you believe that as a Nigerian, your human rights are protected? I am Sandra Ezekwesili.
And I'm Aghogho Oboh.
Hard Facts will be right back.
This is Hard Facts.
On Hard Facts today, we're having conversations about International Human Rights Day. I'm here with Aghogho Oboh. I am Sandra Ezekwesili, and we have the country director for Amnesty International on the show, Ms. Osai Ojigo. Ms. Osai, your organization's objective is to usher in a world where everybody enjoys all the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In your experience, which of those rights is least protected in Nigeria?
Oh, wow. We don't have any sort of statistics or documentation saying, oh, this one has more violations than the other. So if I were to select one right, it would merely be on perception and not necessarily on data. And yeah, it's really hard. But I'd say maybe the right to dignity, because it kind of encompasses a lot of things. How we treat people, how people are pushed around, abused. Any engagement you have at any level, you find people having to deal with that issue. And it's also very embracing when you look at it in terms of how people also access services, public services, which people assess you based on who you are, and then decide how to treat you. So it's quite difficult, really. But then also dignity also takes care of issues around torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. And it's one of the reasons why we pushed for the Anti-Torture Act to be passed, to make it criminal for any agent, any state agent, to actually use torture or cruel and inhuman treatment to carry out any function or to get information or as a tool to extract confessions from suspects.
Very importantly, I think it was an earlier question you're responding to that focused on certain rights, for example, people don't realize, which is even captured in the Constitution, the socio-economic rights of the people, which directly is linked to the distribution of wealth between the rich and the poor. Over the years, we've seen that increase, and people have talked about that. In fact, I've seen a number of protests happen in town, and this phenomenon has reared its head in the way people have viewed society, in the case versus the rich versus the poor, in the way it's done. Socioeconomic rights, what about it for Nigerians?
So it's the most neglected because, like most jurisdictions in the global south, and this is mostly developing countries in Africa and Latin America, you find that socioeconomic rights, because it involves a lot of investments by the state in social services, tends to be relegated to the background, like, oh, we're not ready yet, or we're dealing with that. And in Nigeria, for example, because of the way the rights are included in the Constitution, there's been this big debate about whether they're enforceable, because they're in Part 2 of the Constitution instead of Part 4, which talks about fundamental human rights, but instead they are called fundamental objectives. But the courts have been very interesting in terms of the robust interpretation of what the economic, social, and cultural rights enforceability are. And the fact that Nigeria has ratified and domesticated, which means it has made part of its own national law, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. There is a strong argument that economic, social, and cultural rights are enforceable in Nigeria and should be treated the same way we would treat civil and political rights, like the right to torture, should be the same way. Should be the same way we treat right to food, right to health, right to an education, right to suitable employment, and should be protected nonetheless. And especially in a country like Nigeria that has the resources. So even if Nigeria puts the argument that it should be progressively realized and they don't have the resources, we can show, based on the priority the government places in its budget, that if certain allocations are made to health and education, for example, rather than defense, perhaps there will be less willing people to join criminal gangs, to join insurgencies, and would have a better quality of life. There's a link between poverty, the lack of protection by the state for its most vulnerable people, and the risk that there could be instability as a result of a greater number of people not feeling like they can access on an equal basis with everyone else in the country.
Do you think the average Nigerian is fully aware of all their human rights?
I don't think the average Nigerian is fully aware.
Why do you think
of all
this
their
is?
human
Why do you
rights.
think this is? Why are they not aware?
Because it seems we've noticed the pattern that people tend to assess issues based on religious, ethnic, or certain groupings, rather than whether a right has been violated or not. That's one. Two, there was a lot of focus under military rule on human rights. Our human rights have been violated. There was a lot of human rights education going on by CSOs. People wanted to articulate in good words why what was happening under military rule was wrong. So we believe that after military rule, people kind of said, okay, now we can move ahead. And so I've not paid as much attention to understanding what the rights are in the Constitution, what it means, and this feeling of injustice that they feel, how that can be presented using the human rights framework in order to show accountability of their government and why things need to change. It's not enough for us to complain, oh, this is bad. We need to be able to explain why it is bad. And the human rights framework gives us that language and gives us the necessary obligation, which is the linkage that shows that this is the government's duty to the people within its territory. So that disconnect and the inability of an average Nigerian to link those issues makes it easy to assess that, okay, people still need a lot more human rights education. And this is something that we, as an organization, we really want to do much more of in the new year.
Okay.
And also to ensure that we break down these big words because the people that are most vulnerable tends to be people who are not necessarily captured in the city, but outside of the cities, in rural communities, in communities that might not be as learned. So we need to be able to produce material for everyone at their level, and also work with local partners who would have the local nuances to explain this in a way that they can understand. Because that's the only way. If people are more aware, I think we would have a more empowered populace, and there will be greater cohesion and coordination amongst everyone. So right now, it just seems like human rights is some alien concept somewhere, and they don't want to have a part of it.
But let's go beyond government for a moment, shall we? Here in Nigeria, government isn't the only actor that may be trampling human rights. In what ways do we, as individuals, deny other people their human rights?
Yeah, so when we say that government has an obligation, we don't necessarily mean government is the one directly violating people's rights. But government has a duty to ensure that when someone violates your rights, you have a recourse to justice. And unfortunately, we're not also seeing that. And so it's considered under international law a failure of the state as well, because there are three principles the state ascribes to when it signs up to this international treaty: to respect, to protect, and to fulfill. So respect means that they should not be doing anything within their own power to violate your human rights. So that's the one that most people can easily attest to. Protect means that when somebody violates your rights, the state should come in and say, hey, you've done this, you are responsible, we're going to deal with you. When that is also not happening, it's still a problem. Then fulfill, to take active steps to ensure that you can enjoy those rights. So oftentimes, the protection part is where we are having challenges, and people are getting away with violating other people's rights because we don't have systems that work to ensure that they don't get away with it and that they are punished. If there's punishment, it will deter. But for you to get to punishment stage, you need to identify, investigate, and prosecute. And along the line, something happens and people never get to the end. And this is what is leading to people to take the law into their hands, for people to find alternative ways of sorting out their issues, and for the powerful to continue to use the system to manipulate and abuse the weak.
This year's theme is human rights, is a stand up for human rights, right? How exactly do private individuals stand up for human rights?
When you see something, you say something. Oftentimes, people have seen human rights as, okay, if it concerns you, so it's your responsibility to go to the police or the authorities or whoever to report it. But we're saying it's our collective responsibility, because if an harm continues to happen and we don't correct it, eventually it will affect us indirectly, or eventually it will come and knock on our doors. Secondly, oftentimes when people are being abused, they are not able to speak for themselves. But there are others who are away from the danger who can speak. And that gives protection for the abuse, because the abuser knows there are other people watching and they can be held accountable, because at that point in time, the abuse is in a weak position. So having everyone stand up, to speak up, to report, to stand for people when they are being attacked, means that there will be less people exploiting the system to violate another person's rights. It's our collective responsibility, and we all should be standing up and speaking up when human rights are violated. Because today, it's this guy, it's Jore, it's Bakare or Jalingo, Tomorrow it could be someone you really know, and then by that time there'll be nobody left to stand up for you.
Now, I'm going to need you to do a very quick recap of what my rights are as Sandra Ezekwesili, what my listener as Darlington Cyril Onyema is. What are my rights as a Nigerian, as a human being?
Well, your rights are as a human being, not as a Nigerian. So that even if you go to another country, you still
Your
have
rights
human
are your
rights. And
rights.
that's really important. And even if you're a refugee or a foreigner in Nigeria, you still have human rights. So human rights, there's a whole lot of rights. The most basic, your right to life, and that includes a right to live a healthy life, your right to dignity, your right to freedom from torture, your right to liberty, your right to movement, your right to a fair trial if you're accused of committing a crime or a violation, your right to freedom from discrimination, and your right to freedom of assembly, of association, and freedom of expression, which is even what we're doing today, because the right to speak your opinion, even if it's offensive to other people or causes them discomfort, it's actually protected within the limits of the law. Your right to religion and to belief. And if we go on to the rights, socioeconomic rights, your right to health, your right to food, your right to a healthy environment, your right to education, your right to work in a conducive environment, your right to participate in the governance and decision-making of your country, your right to freedom from violence. And then if we go even more specific, as a woman, you have your women's rights are human rights, but we can even go more specific to say, as a woman, if you're in the family, you have equal rights in the family in decision-making. If you're a child, you have rights to a healthy childhood, to play, to leisure. It's also a right for adults. You have rights to be free from cultural or religious harmful practices such as FGM. And you have rights to sexual and reproductive health rights, because oftentimes we look at rights to health broadly, but even sexual and reproductive health rights in terms of what sort of health services are provided for you as a woman, your access to make decisions about family planning, and your decisions regarding your health should also be an empowered one, and freedom from and freedom to access specific health care that relates to your station in life, whether it's antenatal, prenatal, maternal cases. So there's a whole gamut of rights that we can all tap into, and which at different stages of your life can be activated, because even the kinds of attacks we experience also changes in our cycle of life. Even if you look at violence, the violence you experience, the chances of the kind of violence you experience as a child will be different from the kind you experience as an adult. And there are rights there to protect and make clear that you should be treated first and foremost as a precious human being. And if we all treat each other with that dignity, we will not intentionally violate
each other's
our
rights. Okay, let me take your calls now. Don't forget that everybody's getting 1 minute 30 seconds because we want to talk to as many people as possible. We've got about 10 minutes on the show, and if we all talk for 1 minute 30 seconds, we can talk to as many people as possible. Do you believe that as a Nigerian, your human rights are protected? Do you think that you know what your rights are? Are you fully prepared to stand up for these rights? As a Nigerian, do you fully understand what your rights are? And are you fully prepared to stand up for those rights? 1 minute, 30 seconds. Peter is in Shomolu. Hello, Peter.
Yeah, Sandra, good evening.
Good evening. Go ahead.
Okay. My own is a question, please. I want to know from the human rights angle, to what extent can Amnesty International help a victim of human rights violation in Nigeria to get justice. Because from what he has said, a situation whereby Teju market was demolished and made a modern market, and those women, the majority of them couldn't get stalls there, and they go to the street to sell, and they are bundled into trucks for selling illegally. And then you find out that at a point, what is happening in Kogi State, I'm not praying, who knows? Maybe tomorrow now those women come out to protest again, and the government of the day will send its agency to tear gas them out of the street. So a case is there where the government is the one determining what should be my human right. Now, in a situation of this nature, we find ourselves handicapped, helpless. So what can Amnesty International do to help such Nigerians to get justice? That's just my question. Not just talking, but what do they do?
All right. Thank you, Peter. Mr. Darlington, hello.
Yeah, Sandra, how are you doing?
Very well.
Good. No right is absolute. If not, the government cannot send you to jail or even sentence you to death. I mean, we all know that for a certain crime, life can be taken. So, what happened to that right? That means at that point, that right has been abridged. So, let nobody be deceived that your right is absolute. When there is an infraction against the law, your right may be withdrawn.
Mr. Darlington, I don't think anyone has implied otherwise in the conversation we've had today. Vincent is in Apapa. Hello, Vincent.
My sister.
Good evening.
You know what? I will continue to ask the question: do we have? Because according to what the lady there was saying, going around the whole spectrum, the government leads the way. So, how sure are we that the people that we are given the mandate can lead the way? From all that is happening now, it is -1. So the problem now is this: when the state is not ready to even protect you, then how sure are you to now come out for those rights? That is the serious question here, and that the whole thing goes down to electioneering. I continue to say that electioneering because somebody that don't hold power selflessly can never oblige to your to rule of law and your self-esteem. So the problem now is this: we have to go down to the fundamentals. We have big fundamental problems, and the leaders we have now, come rulers, they are all shying away from it. Let us go down. They are shying away from going down to the fundamentals and find out our problem. Have a bigger problem. And the problem is restructure the whole system so that we don't have this opaque system that we are calling them leaders.
All right, Vincent, your time is up. Thanks for calling to share your thoughts. Osai.
Yes.
The first person said, what else does Amnesty International do aside talk to ensure that a person whose rights has been abused gets justice?
Okay, it's very interesting that he talked about what else apart from talk. When people's rights are violated, it's important that, like in this case where many people were affected by this incident where their shops were taken from them and reallocated, for them to come together as a group. One thing we need to understand about enforcement of rights is that the people who are affected need to also be a part of it. And one of the ways Amnesty works with groups is to throw our voice behind whatever initiative we're doing. We are a campaigning organization, so we don't often do what we call frontline services. So we're not going to provide lawyers, even though we work with a network of lawyers. But we can advise. There are lawyers that work in this area and have this specialty. And if you've petitioned the police or the authorities or whatever, Amnesty International can assess the situation and also join our voices to what is happening. When we raise issues of violation, it gets international attention. And that gives the additional push that people need to actually keep hope alive, to challenge the system. But the enforcement of that right is on government. And we can only do that if people are willing to stand and sustain that fight. So it's not that people do it for today and then the rest, but to continually demand from their legislators and their executive governors for change to happen. If people are in jail, one of the ways we go about it is to ensure that to investigate to see, okay, have they followed due process? They haven't, then we make calls for them to release them unconditionally or charge them to court with an offense. And we found that this has worked very effectively because then the police know that this is a case that Amnesty is interested in and that they need to act quickly or release the person. But we don't want it to be a situation that it's only when Amnesty has raised an issue that they act. We want institutional change to happen. And that can only happen if the gentleman and other people in the community are willing to work together with NGOs to demand for change within this institution. That is the only way we can have a sustainable. Otherwise, we would get this case to be sorted out, another case will happen again. And with 180 million people in the country, there's no way that an office with 15 people is going to be able to deal with every single case. And that is why human rights education is going to be key and building the capacity of local communities and then activists on the ground in order for us to create a mass number of people who stand and understand human rights and are working together. Then on the issue of the rule of law, we know that as long as we do not we allow things to slide, things only get worse. Why are we getting a lot of attention now? Is because people have raised uproar. People were shocked by what happened to Shore, the rearrest that happened, and then the flagrant attitude of the DSS in that attack. People were actually shocked by it. They're like, oh, is this really happening? So that means even in the court, which is the last resort for the common person, this kind of thing can happen. So is that anger and disappointment that we need people to be able to channel now into the constructive dialogue that this is unacceptable in present-day Nigeria, because it's going to affect all of us.
Yes, indeed.
And I say this time and time again, we need to stand up when we see something, because once people know that this thing is not nice, they will stop doing it. But if nobody speaks, they will try it again.
All right, Osayo Jigo, thank you so much for your time. She's the country representative